Hi, welcome to the Seattle Angel Conference and APUS Health Angels event. Our workshop today is on patient engagement, and we have Laura Jantos who's come to speak with us today. So I think we'll just go quickly around the room and let people introduce themselves. If you have any specific questions that you want Laura to address as she's talking, or you have any questions, then just feel free to raise them. I'm Elizabeth Cross-Nickel, and I'm working with John Seacrest on a spin out of Seattle Angel Conference. We're using the same format. For people who aren't aware of what that is, it's a number of months of education, and then we follow it by a progressive due diligence evaluation, and we award a company that the investors think is investable and like the team and the product, an investment of up to $200K. Our APUS Health Angels event will start education through the fall, and the investment event and the due diligence will go from January until March. We also have Seattle Angel Conference, which is running sooner, and that is starting. The companies need to apply by August the 26th, and just shortly afterwards, we start our due diligence on the companies that are joining there. Alicia and Raj are actually entering into SAC 20, so maybe they can talk about their experience. And so is Praveen, who's just on his way in. I'll turn it to Michael.
Hello, I'm Michael Irving, a shellfish farmer up here in Alaska, and I spent a lot of time in the hospital, and a mom that was an oncology nurse for 35 years, so I thought it'd be interesting.
Thank you. Alicia?
Hi, I'm Alicia Adamson. I'm the founder of Paranoia Coach. We're currently in alpha. I'm calling all coaches and creators of coaching content to help us to co-create the tools that you need for your practice. So we're focusing on practice management, client engagement, and designing a marketplace just for coaches. I'm really excited about this talk, Laura. In talking with Elizabeth, apparently we have a lot in common. So thank you for having me.
Aliyah Labs.
Oh, hi. My name is Hamid Farzaneh. And in fact, Aliyah Labs is not involved at all on that topic. We are in the smart home industry, but I'm on the board of another company called Sensoplex. And their CEO couldn't attend, so he asked me to attend and essentially to take notes. So I will just be listening today and reporting back to him.
Thank you. And we can share the link with you, so that'll be easier for your note taking.
That would be great. Thank you.
Aaron?
Aaron Rose, GT Ventures. I've been investing since almost 30 years. Made my first investment in digital health all the way back in 2005. And it's a significant portion of my portfolio. Most of my holdings are actually in international companies. So my first investment in digital health was back in China in 2005. And then I've got holdings in the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Europe. And I think what brought me to today's event was Laura's background. I saw on the meetup, quite impressive, and I look forward to learning from her and others. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. Raj?
Hi guys, I'm Raj. I'm the son of 5 other physician immigrants in my family, and I was the one dropout physician from WashU, but so far it's been very, very interesting. We are on the entrepreneurial side working towards kind of a direct-to-consumer preventative wellness platform. We recently partnered with Pivotal Ventures, which is Melinda Gates' group, working on some of their longevity work, and very interested on safe patient handling and the continuum of care inside the healthcare industry.
Thanks, Raj. Eli? I think you're on mute, Eli. Oh, there you go.
Hi, My name's Eli. I'm working on a company named Bodily, and we are solving for dehydration, especially for diabetic patients, pregnant women, and patients in urology. By offering a double inflated smart water bottle that tracks how much you drink, that pairs with an app that tells you how much you should be drinking based on your physical criteria and weather, local weathering, etc. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Eli. And Stephanie.
Hello, my name is Stephanie Hillman. I have a consulting firm called Brightwood Consulting. I have worked in the patient experience space for nearly 30 years, sharing stakeholder information with clinical decision makers and executives.
Thank you. John.
Hi, I'm John Seacrest. I'm the founder of the Seattle Angel Conference and basically drive economic development in the Northwest through a series of programs, growing new companies that are fundable and more angel investors. And I put my LinkedIn as well as links for Seattle Angel Conference and APIS Health into the chat. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura, I'd like to turn it to you. I'm going to ask if you'll introduce yourself. Oh, Bob, I see that you just joined, and Bob is my co-partner in APIS Health Angels. And so I'm going to stop for a second, go back and give him a minute to say hello.
Everybody, good to meet everybody. My name is Bob Fong. I'm a physician working with SAC for a few years now and helping the team get a health version of SAC going called APIS Health Angels, looking for new investors as well as health tech startups. So send them our way. What else do I do? I'm helping with a startup, co-founding a startup that basically leverages technology and kiosks so that patients can basically automate all of their check-in process prior to seeing physicians in outpatient clinics. So looking forward to learning from everybody.
Thanks, Bob. I realize that there's a couple more joined. Neil, would you like to introduce yourself? We're just saying a little bit about who we are and if you've got a specific question for Laura.
Hi, I'm Neil Sofian. I'm the CEO of TUZAG. We're involved in conversational AI around health engagement and activation. And so I'm very much interested in seeing what you think is the secret sauce. I know I have my views, and I'd love to hear what yours are.
Good. And Alicia? Or Alicia, maybe? You're muted if you... And Praveen.
Hi, this is Alicia. Oh, well.
That's okay. Go ahead, Alicia.
Go ahead.
Hi, this is Alicia, and my background is in, I'm a registered nurse, but I'm also have been very interested into all kind of innovations in healthcare. Work with patients and physicians, insurance, and policy. I'm happy to be here.
Nice to have you join us. And sorry, Praveen, I cut you off there, but we'll jump back in.
Oh, no problem. Hey, this is Praveen Akula, founder of Fave Kitchens, a distributed restaurant platform. I'm a part of SAC20, an applicant of SAC20 as well. I'm here to understand different perspective in a different industry. I'm from food tech, but here to understand problems in health or health tech. I'll be a listener most of the times today.
Thank you. Okay, Laura, back to you. Thanks, Praveen.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Hi, everybody. I think I'm just going to get into it because I'll introduce myself as we kind of go through this. But as Elizabeth said, I was at HIMSS last week, which is the first time that I've been at a conference in 9 years, which was pretty crazy. I'm going to take you through my story as a brain injury survivor and a former consultant to healthcare IT. And actually, I've started consulting again for about the past 7 months or so. So I'm kind of back in the game. But give you a different perspective on patient engagement from the perspective of someone who has a brain injury. hopefully leave you with some thoughts on where there are opportunities, because there's some pretty massive opportunities out there. So just to kind of, I guess, get into the intro, I got into healthcare IT right out of undergrad. I did undergraduate research on a social determinants of health issue, Black infant mortality in Pittsburgh when I was going to school. And I was working in supercomputing part-time, and I thought it would be really cool if you could take supercomputers and public health problems and put them together and solve them. And I got a job at the Pittsburgh, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center in biomedical informatics straight out of undergrad, and just got completely hooked on this field of trying to enable better healthcare through the use of technology. And after grad school, I have an MBA and an MHA. I landed at a consulting firm based here in Seattle, which is where I'm originally from. And over the next, almost 20 years, I developed a healthcare consulting practice, predominantly provider focused, but very closely aligned to adoption of EHRs, because I'd been in a lot of early stage stuff. And back at UPMC, we did early AI. We did stuff before HIPAA. We were able to do some very fun things that I frankly never really saw come to market. But over the course of my career, I did work a lot with organizations across the country and sometimes in Europe around EHR adoption, data intelligence, integration, revenue cycle, kind of running the gamut of creating, better patient experience and thinking that I was doing things that were with the patient in mind. And as you can imagine, being a principal partner shareholder of a consulting firm, I was working like all the time, like I'm sure you are all doing. And then in 2012, I had an accident when I was snowboarding up at Whistler and diagnosed with a traumatic brain injury. Brain injury is a really funny thing. We hear about concussions, we hear about people kind of getting knocked on the head or your bell rung. But when it happens, I got to tell you, the first couple of days, I didn't even realize that was what happened. I was taken down to the clinic, and they thought that my neck was broken. And when we realized my neck wasn't broken, I thought, oh, okay, well, I'm fine. I'm going to go back to the condo and I'll just kind of see how I feel. It wasn't until a couple of days later that I realized that I was having some issues. And it wasn't until a month later that I realized that I had bilateral subdural hematomas. So when you have a brain injury, what they typically say is that most people get better in a week. If it's not a week, it's a month. If it's not a month, it's 6 months. If it's not 6 months, it's a year. And if you're not better to where you were in a year, then you're going to be kind of in this long haul category, which is what I'm in. But, I've got everything you could possibly have from a social determinants of health perspective. My husband's an attorney. My dad's a doctor from one of those medical families also. I know tons of people in town. I know who to go to. I reached out and I got the best team I possibly could. And I ended up having to retire from consulting at the end of that year. I just couldn't function the same way. Essentially what happened was I could focus for about 45 minutes twice a day, and that was about it. And I'm sure if you think about that in the context of your own life, you realize that's about enough time to maybe get through email, and then get some coffee, and that's about it. So I thought, well, I'll retire. I'll focus on recovery. I'll be back. I'll be able to do this again. And honestly, it was a long haul. I did a lot of volunteering. I did a lot of therapy. I was able to do things, and I was able to do some pretty significant things over time, breaking them down into little pieces. And in 2018, I got to the point where I was starting to think, well, maybe I can go back to healthcare in some way. Maybe there's something I can do that would work. And I was sitting in my car at a light, and somebody broadsided. I don't think you could be watching TV. Or T-boned me. And, all of a sudden, out of the blue, I lost 6 years of progress. I was back at the hospital trying to talk to doctors about what had happened to me, suspecting a brain injury, not really sure. And then coming out of that, realized that, okay, this stinks, but who's better than me to be able to recover? Because I've already been through it. I know where to go. I know what you need to do. It wasn't, I think, more than 24 hours later when I realized that all of my providers had retired. My neurologist, who I saw once a year to make sure that I kind of stayed on his panel, had switched his practice to adult autism. My therapist had retired, and I had to go find entirely new care team. And so the genesis of this discussion is really, why is stuff that should be really easy so incredibly hard? Why shouldn't you be able to just kind of bounce back, find people, and be able to navigate and get to where you need to be, or at least to where you were? So I see there's some things in chat. I'm going to hold off looking at that because I do have a bunch of attention issues. And so I'm going to focus on talking for a little bit, and then we'll get to comments and questions if that's okay with folks. But let's talk a little bit about brain injury, because I think it's important to understand what TBI or what concussions are. And we hear a lot. We see, football is going to start. We're going to see a whole bunch of stuff on the field. There's all brain injury, which includes congenital stuff and degenerative and psychiatric brain injury. And then there's a category of acquired brain injury. So after you're born, you might acquire a brain injury. Some of that's traumatic and some of it's non-traumatic. Non-traumatic could be exposure to toxins or those types of things. Traumatic brain injury or concussion, and I think it's important to understand this, is either impact or non-contact. So you don't actually have to hit anything to have a concussion. The first time when I had the subdural hematomas, my head hit the snow. I was wearing a helmet. I wasn't going very fast. It's not a great snowboarding story. I wasn't doing anything cool at all. But there was contact. The second time when I was sitting in my car and I was hit from the side, there was no contact. And actually I picked up the phone and I called 911. EMTs arrived before the police officer did. The police officer said to me, "Who called these people? You're fine. Your airbag didn't deploy. Nothing happened." That's not the marker for brain injury. I think it's really important to understand. The second thing, and the reason why I want to talk about this, is because when we think as a healthcare industry about people with chronic disease, we have a tendency to focus on diabetes, heart disease, COPD. We also think of acute things like cancer, but we don't tend to think about the effect of cognitive disorders, and they're incredibly prevalent. So 24 million people worldwide are having TBI each year. Every 9 seconds, someone in the US has a TBI. 2.2 million are treated, and a very small percentage of those actually die. So we've got a lot of people living with this injury, meaning 5.3, and this is an old slide. I mean, this data is from 2010, so it's much higher now. 5.3 million are living with a TBI-related disability. And as we know from sports and concussion talk and football and all these other things, is that you have this cumulative effect. If you have multiple brain injuries, it gets worse and worse and worse. And so then you also become at risk for other things, neurodegenerative disease, Alzheimer's, and that sort of type of stuff. The pieces on the right I spoke to a little bit. I just want you to understand, if this happens to you, or your family or somebody else, mild MTBI, which is what we call concussion, you don't have to be unconscious. You don't have to hit on your head on anything. And another marker of this is it doesn't show up on imaging specifically. It does not, there's no visible sign of it. Moderate, which is what I had after the first accident, you can be unconscious and you will have contusions or bleeding, subdural hematomas. So there will be signs of injury on imaging. That's a higher category than your basic concussion. And then severe traumatic brain injury is when you're unconscious more than one day. So when we think about the incidence and prevalence of brain injury in our community and people that are trying to navigate their own health journeys and be healthy and have these cognitive considerations, well, what is it? I think the first thing to understand is that this is your brain. And so your brain controls everything, and it can come out in a ton of different diffuse ways. So we think about headaches and we think about nausea and we think about maybe fatigue, but really pretty much anything can be affected. Loss of taste, sense, memory, of course, dizziness, sleep cycles, sensitivity to noise, sensitivity to light, processing speed, emotional control, things that look like mental illness, depression, anxiety. It's really diffuse. Endocrine disorders, I mean, all kinds of stuff can be affected by a traumatic brain injury. And the other piece of it is that it takes time to figure out what's actually wrong with you. So you can have this happen and think you're okay, which I did that first week after Whistler. I thought it was all right. It took several days to even think anything was wrong with me, but it took several months to really figure out what was wrong with me and at what level and what I needed to do to get better. So I just want to stop for a second and comment on the fact that there really are very few brain injury centers around. When you have a concussion or a brain injury, there really isn't a care path like you would have if you had cancer, or a navigator that really helps you figure out where you need to go and who you need to talk to. And you're also dealing with all those symptoms on the other side. And so it's an incredibly challenging process. There are a lot of specialists that can be involved in the diagnosis as well as rehabilitation, and even trying to figure out who the people are that understand brain injury and can treat it is incredibly challenging. And probably the first area that I want to point out that I think is a massive area where there's opportunity to really make things better for people. The other thing I want to talk about a little bit is how memory works. And I think when we think about memory, we think you have a good memory or you have a bad memory, or you're good at multitasking or you're bad at multitasking. Memory isn't a good or bad thing, it's a process. So in order to remember something, and think about this in patient engagement in general, if we want to change patient behaviors, you have to think about how the brain works. Something has to be presented in a way that people can actually pay attention to it, and then they can encode it, and then they can store it. And then there's a decision essentially at some point about, like, is this something that really I need to have in my brain or not? And then it gets consolidated for actual retrieval. So there's a process that we need to think about. Now, when I had the second accident in 2018, I think I might have said it was a bit of a call to action. It was a motor vehicle accident. You know, it really shook my family. The first time wasn't fun. The second time was really kind of a bit of an insult. And being the consultant that I was, and being that it was a motor vehicle accident, I had to track everything. So I created an Excel spreadsheet, and I looked at every single time I went to an appointment, how many referrals I made, how many claims I received, or EOBs I received, or statements I received that were wrong that I had to make phone calls on. And just tracking not all the phone time, but just the time that it took me to get to and from the 125 visits that I had in the first year or so, the travel time, the time to park my car, to figure out how to get to the clinic, to check in, to be seen, to remember what was said, to get back to the house. Given, again, that 45 minutes twice a day, if I call that my cognitively available time, the time that I spent directly pursuing my own recovery was 50% of that cognitively available time. So what does that mean? That means that I had no cognitive ability to do normal things like pay bills, go to the grocery store, pick the kids up, drive them to whatever activity was going on. The stuff that I had just kind of gotten back to being able to do on a fairly reliable and regular basis, all that was out of the window. And that didn't even take into consideration, you know, other aspects of how challenging this is for patients in terms of, you know, I had to generate 11 referrals to find 3 providers. And I even generated a referral to a provider that I don't think exists. I'm not even sure how that happens. But I went through a big process of trying to find neurologists and physical medicine and rehabilitation, or anybody who could take me in less than 3 months. And I got an appointment with somebody, and the more I tried to find out about them online, the less I could find out. And finally, the clinic called back and said, you know, I don't think this person's actually here. So as a person trying to navigate this with these diffuse injuries and these diffuse symptoms, I can't express to you how frustrating this is, how much time this took away from anything else I was able to do. There are a couple other statistics in here that I think are important. 10% of my claims were dead wrong. And there's no ability in the system for me to see what's going on with my claims, with my medical claims, or to be able to tell somebody, hey, you just submitted that motor vehicle accident claim to workers' comp and it's not workers' comp. And so the amount of times that I had to continue to track down and try to get stuff paid, or went through processes where maybe there was a systems conversion at some place and they didn't convert over my insurance information. So suddenly I got a gigantic bill. And you know how that comes across. It just comes across like, hey, there's a new message in your chart. Why don't you take a look at it? So I'm in the middle of, Elizabeth will appreciate this. I was in the middle of a swim meet one day and I got that thing and I popped it open. I almost had a heart attack because I owed like $2,000 because they didn't convert my insurance over, and then had to go through the process of calling, clearing it up, figuring out what was going on. Now, I understand how healthcare works. I understand all these processes. I have all the patience in the world. I understand how to get a referral. I understand that when I'm trying to get it referred into a doctor and told the doctor needs to review me to see if I'm part of a good fit for his practice, that I can get other people to kind of write letters on my behalf and work the system, but most people can't. And the other thing to understand with something like this is that for all of us, this is a fine line between being very high functioning and losing your family, losing your ability to drive, losing your career, and losing your housing. Extremely thin line. Again, I am super lucky. I have a stable home environment. I have a husband who cares about me and also happens to be an attorney. Again, I've got all these people behind me that can help me navigate this stuff, but most people don't. And this is at least 1 in 60 Americans right now, if not more than that. So the other thing that I think that as investors and innovators, you're all very acutely aware of is that there's this massive shift going on right now between kind of traditional medicine and healthcare environments and sort of venture-backed, sort of up-and-coming startup telehealth environments or other kinds of companies that are taking a different approach, maybe a virtual approach. I think the problem, as I see as a patient, is that there's a big push and pull between these things. Now, I'm an astute patient who's going to go out and find the best providers I can, but the systems are all set up assuming that I'm going to work within one healthcare system, or even if I'm going to go use a Teladoc or something that's an online service that I'm going to be using those things. We need to understand that health systems do not singularly control the process of being healthy. And I think, part of why I decided to come back and start telling my story and get back into industry is because of legislation like 21st Century Cures and other things that I think are making it more of an imperative to have better integration of data and ownership of data. Because if you take, what this is on this slide just shows the traditional processes and how challenging the traditional processes are to navigate with a brain injury. But when I step back from all this stuff and I think of like what information was there for me, there wasn't much. And I'm on Social Security disability, and when you're on Social Security disability, you have to fill out some pretty complicated forms on a regular basis. And when I went into the patient portal and tried to fill those out, what I had to do was basically scroll back through, click on something, open it up, and all I was looking for was, who have I seen in the past year? Why was I there? What did they diagnose me with? And what was the outcome? Was it a referral or a script or an intervention? What was it? Pretty basic stuff. But as a patient, I have no business intelligence. I have no ability to even drop that stuff into Excel and sort it on my own. I had to hunt and peck, again with my 45 minutes twice a day, and write it down. I mean, that's the only thing I can do in the context of a day. So think about the other bit is that if we spend the time to acquire healthcare wherever it is in a traditional setting, the effort to get there, to then present yourself to somebody, and when you get into that visit and they say, how are you doing? Honestly, my gut reaction is always like, I'm great. How are you? It's so good to see you, right? You want to be the pleasant patient that they want to continue to work with. You don't want to be the person who's causing them to generate 11 referrals or do all these other things. By the time you get home, you can't remember what anybody said. And so there's nothing that's really timely to me. There's a lot of things that the health system wants me to do. They want me to schedule my visits online. They want me to pay my bills. But when I try to drill down and figure out, well, who'd you send that bill to and how was it adjudicated? There's very little data out there. Very little for me to actually make sure that things are done right. And so, as I said, this is all shifting, right, in a really good way. And that's actually what I've been working with. When I came back, I started doing some great projects with organizations around telehealth, telebehavioral health, and remote patient monitoring. And initially, when COVID hit, there was a huge push to telehealth, and there was a huge push to only compensate for video visits. And luckily, I think we've kind of pulled back from that, realized that basic phone visits are really, really valuable from a care process standpoint. I can recall after COVID, when everything shut down, and frankly, when COVID happened, it kind of brought everybody to my level. I'd like to say things got slow to the point where the pace worked for me. Sorry, brain injury, can't remember where I was, that I got a telephone encounter call from one of my providers, just checking on me, seeing how I was doing. And I was out for a walk with my daughter, and I was able to put her on speakerphone, and she, of course I was doing everything wrong, which I normally did. Now, to understand what I had done with therapies was I would go in vestibular therapy, a lot of balance issues. So I had video, my therapist showing me how to do something, and then I would create reminders in my phone to remind me several times a day with the list of what I was supposed to do and how I was supposed to do that. Now, why isn't that an app? Why isn't that something that can support me as a patient? And so when she just phone called me and said, hey, how's it going? Let's talk about it. It was transformative. So we work in healthcare on very cool things. We work on AI, machine learning, big integration, big data problems, cures for cancer, pharmaceuticals, genetics, all sorts of really cool stuff. But when it comes down to the very small, basic, how do we really make it work for folks in a meaningful way? That seems to be the biggest challenge. And so that's where I would challenge all of you to start thinking about, like, if we can actually make things work well for people, I think that's going to be the game changer. And so one other piece that I noticed as I've been going through this process is that when I look at even remote patient monitoring, which should be super easy, you give a patient with hypertension a blood pressure cuff, they go home, there's an app they can download, hopefully it's in the language that they speak. It reminds them to take their blood pressure, it tells them what to do, hopefully that's integrated to their patient record someplace and the doctor sees it, or there's a service behind it. What I'm finding and actually working with organizations doing it is that it's incredibly complicated because, again, the products are coming from a variety of different perspectives. Some of them are marketing directly to patients. Some of them are marketing a product and a service. Some of them are marketing to health systems. And so depending on what product is being used, there can often be a lot of confusion, a lack of integration, and essentially a big mismatch between the patient population and actually the care that's going to be provided. So again, more opportunity. So I spent a bunch of time last year, starting around this time last year, thinking about if I was going to come back, what would I do? Some of my thought process was, maybe I could do a startup and I could fix it myself. A lot of people said, don't even bother, so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so will have this fixed in the next year. I'm not convinced. I think it needs to be fixed. I think we can fix it, but I think what we need to do is engage patients in a way that works for them and helps them solve the problem. Because since the health systems aren't providing the information, patients are going to each other. And those connections are very interesting and meaningful. And frankly, I think there's a lot of information that patients have that can help move many of these areas forward much faster, facilitate development, facilitate systems integration, facilitate patient experience if we only really incorporate them more meaningfully. And this is just a basic, a basic wheel. What I really I want people to know who I am and what I've tried, who I see, what my plan is, what the other options are. But really what I want is access to my data in a meaningful way with reminders and alerts that make sense to me, that help me find the right doctors, that help me understand how much this recovery is going to cost and what the options are for me as I try to navigate my own path through that so that I can make appropriate decisions. And I keep getting glimmers of hope in different places. And I can talk a little bit, give you time to ask some questions. We can talk a little bit about what I saw at HIMSS, but I still don't see that anybody really fully gets it. And you know what? It's not their fault because I am them. I am also the person that implemented this stuff for 20 years. I wrote the RFPs. I thought the systems did these things. We're all in the same boat, and we're all really good people that are working really hard and trying to fix something that's super complicated. But I feel like there is, again, think of it from a patient perspective and really try to pull it together in a much better way to actually get better outcomes. So I'll stop there.
Laura, there's been a number of comments on the things that you've been addressing, a lot of nodded heads for the struggles that this implies for any of us who have had a head injury. We're just resonating here. I like some of the quotes that John was trying to capture, which is, as a patient, I had no business intelligence. I couldn't even download things from just spreadsheet. I haven't had the complexity of the 50K in expenses, but I certainly know the difficulty. Is anyone working on something that is going to help on this operational component here on the team or helping the information flow? Ken, I'm thinking about you a little bit.
Yes, as a matter of fact, Ken Allgood, founder of HealthFlow. Sorry, I was late. I had a client meeting. This is precisely what we were demoing at HIMSS. Specifically, our use case there was around taking AI to the edge, and we were partnering with Red Hat on that. And our HealthFlow platform, specifically how it was implemented there, was in the way you're describing, around a patient that was critically ill. And we were remote monitoring her, using workflow to remind her to take her blood pressure, to put the oximeter on, and also sending her questionnaires for her or her family to fill out regarding state of mind, because the focus was on early identification of sepsis for that particular use case at HIMSS. But yes, that's everything you're saying it's a huge gap that's out there right now. And that's what we're trying to fix. So I wouldn't say we're 100% there yet, but we're moving in that direction. So the issues you're running through, certainly from a TBI perspective, but really any chronic care issues, they really tap into these same problems. Even just general rehabilitation for major injuries from an orthopedic perspective, the same level of complexity sometimes gets run into, and there's no one there to really take you and your data, because healthcare, like we said on the panel, healthcare is not about data. Healthcare is an action. The data is simply a way to achieve those actions. It's a facilitator. So taking you and your data, but also adding into it your team, both your personal and your clinical team, into the discussion and making that available. That's our goal, and that's what we're building towards. So, yeah, thank you, Elizabeth, for mentioning me, because that is, I don't know how many people were at HIMSS, but we were pretty well attended down at the very end in the interoperability showcase. But it's a huge nut to crack, And no one's really done it yet based upon my walking around at HIMSS and looking at what other people had running.
Yeah, I might have gone by your booth. I did that massive march through
Yeah.
different sections on Wednesday, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I something about sepsis sounds kind of familiar, but I think what you're describing sounds really promising. The other thing that you said is something that I typically say when I'm talking about this with other folks, is that you get the impression that healthcare is something that's being done to you, not something that you're actually a participant of, or that you have any ability to drive the process. And you know, when I was at HIMSS, I gave the example that at one point there was a thought that I should try this intervention, because you know what happens if I'm you know working too long and doing something that's too confusing. I'll start getting a bunch of different symptoms, and then ultimately I get a bad headache and I need to kind of take a big break and take a nap and make it go away. But the idea was like take some kind of a tube, snake it up my nose, freeze a nerve, and see if that would work. And I needed to do maybe 10 of those, and they weren't really sure what it would cost, maybe like $10,000. And, you know, it was a 3-month process to get in to see the ENT to actually get like a real consult on it. And after I went through all that, you know, the ambiguity of like, wow, this really doesn't sound like a lot of fun, snaking a nose, you know, tube up my nose and freezing this nerve maybe 10 times for 10 grand. I think there are better ways I can spend 10 grand. But having no ability to know if that's worked for other people, or to talk to other people, or to see how germane that is to my particular situation. Even down to like really simple things, like I was seeing speech therapist and vestibular therapists in the same facility. And mostly I was doing that on different days. And one day I did both of them. So I had the first one, I went, got lunch, I came back, I went to pay my second copay, and they said, you know what? When you have 2 visits in the same day, you don't need to pay, you only pay the copay once. And I had been doing this for 10 weeks at that time. And I had nobody is helping me manage the financial aspect of any of this recovery. Even on a really basic, like, you know, what is covered, what's not covered kind of perspective, constant phone calls, clarifications, things like that. At HIMSS, I got more into some of the pharmacy issues I've seen, and prior auths and refills, and there's a certain point too that people talk about where the process of obtaining your own healthcare becomes so unbelievably challenging. And again, all the people are super nice. I've got the best care team ever. All the staff are fabulous. Like, everyone's great. But the process is so challenging and frustrating that you end up having like PTSD about it, or like anxiety. I know I have to refill a med, and I just don't know what's going to happen this time that's going to botch it and make it not happen and make me not have it on time, and what outcome that's going to give me. And it just becomes like a you know, a care process associated trauma situation that's really challenging.
Yeah, and it would seem that would be an easy thing too. And yet, even though you're on a schedule and you should be able to automate that even getting the reminder yourself, but more importantly, being able to automate that refill, that's something that should just happen, you would think.
So here's what happens. Again, we don't have the patient in the process. And in the room you were in, I talked to somebody who did Rev Cycle, and they showed me all this cool stuff. And I said, okay, well, where can the patient see that? And they said, oh, of course not. The patient has to call the office, right? Because we think the patient shouldn't see it. So here's what happens. Like, I get the text reminder on my phone that I'm due for refill. I push 1 to refill. I don't hear anything. I drop into the pharmacy. They say, oh yeah, you need a prior auth. We sent the forms to the doctor's office. We haven't heard back. I send them a message. I call them. I call the pharmacy again. You know, and now I'm the bothersome patient who's bugging everybody, which I, again, don't want to be, but I can't see what's going on. And then I get a call back saying that it's stuck at an intermediary because I use one address for my EOBs and another for my health insurance, you know, like a PO box for one of them, and my home address for my credit card that's tied to the, so it got bumped out. So we've solved that. If I had seen that, I could have fixed that days before. Then more time goes by and it's stuck at a secondary intermediary. And so then I'm on Twitter tweeting my insurer saying, hey, what's up with this? Then I finally get it passed through. And the answer that I get on why is this, my bottom line question is like, why do I need a prior auth for something I've been on for the past year? And am I going to need another one? And the response I get, and again, I'm super savvy, like if you're going to talk about CPT codes with me, I'm going to know what they are, is that the FDA requires this. Well, the FDA doesn't require this. I know that. So again, like we sometimes use healthcare's complexity to make our processes the way we want to make our processes to steer people. You know, I'm also on a National Quality Forum NQF technical expert panel on patient-reported outcomes for patient-reported outcome measures. And so I'm getting up on value-based care, but we make certain things so complicated that patients can't understand them. So if we're to talk about surveys and experience, you get those all the time. But I don't really know, I know those might hit comp, but often I get them and I don't even know what visit they're talking about, which provider they're talking about. You know, they're so generic and off track. I kind of want to just say, okay, everybody's great. But sometimes I don't want to say everybody's great. And you can't influence any of it.
Yeah. There's a lot of work to do.
A lot of work to do.
And Laura, you're a pretty engaged participant in all of this. Neil, I want to pick up on your comment with regards to remote patient monitoring. Do you want to just jump into the conversation here?
Sure. I think one of the problems, and I've been listening to Laura talk all along, and it's like one of the things that we have a problem with, whether you're talking about diabetes or brain injury, is that we got to quit starting with the disease or the CPT code or the risk. We should start with the person. And if you start with the person and say everything has to be, you were talking about how memory works. It works contextually. And it works contextually such that, for example, you were saying, I wish I knew somebody else who had gone through this experience because I'm more likely to listen to them. It's something we wrote about a long time ago called microcultures of meaning, where you'll listen, MOM, you'll listen to your mom. And that's really the kind of the basis of why things like Facebook succeeded, was that kind of contextual structure. But that means when you start thinking about how you're going to provide engagement, it has to be around solving the problem from the patient's perspective. What problem does Laura want solved? It's not what problem do we think a healthcare system should be solving. And I think there's two different issues here. One is the complexity of the healthcare system, and that almost requires an ombudsman kind of role. And I think that's different than the role of engagement in terms of helping you manage, because a lot of what I heard Laura talking about was not just managing the medical system, but then picking up the kids, figuring out how to get the food. I mean, there was a whole surrounding part of trying to live her life, that if you want to engage people, you have to engage them in the things that they care about. And the same is true with remote patient monitoring. Telling somebody, gee, your blood pressure is high. Who gives a shit? I mean, quite honestly, the average person does not care about their health, particularly if they're not experiencing the kind of trauma that Laura is experiencing. This is a true story. I was at a conference talking about this kind of thing, and an individual walked up to me and he said, I want to tell you a story. He said, I had a patient who was a significant diabetic, close to losing his feet, and he was completely non-adherent to everything except for one thing. He showed up at my office every 8 weeks without fail, and then did absolutely nothing I asked him to do. And so we quit even trying after a while, but we shot the shit. And then I said, what are you doing after your meeting today, with me today? He said, well, I'm going to Cabela's. I'm going to be buying some new fishing tackle, a fly fishing outfit for my grandson so we can go fly fishing for his birthday. And he said, well, have a good time, because it's probably the last time you're ever going to do it. Your feet have reached a point you can't be in any kind of cold water. He started taking insulin that day. Talking to him about his health was meaningless. Talking to him about his grandson and fly fishing made all the difference in the world. That means for us to engage people, we're going to have to be able to collect a totally different type of data. It's not about CPT codes. It's not about claims. It's not about neuropathy. It's not about trauma. I mean, you have to have all that information too, but those are only attributes of who Laura or Neil or Elizabeth or John is. And if we are going to engage people, we are going to have to find a way to do this and not just do it with people, but do it with scale. And that's the world I spend my day in, is how do you scale that so that way you can also then move it to live people, because there's certain problems only people can manage. But there's some parts of this that you can actually create warm, caring support and companionship and concierge, even in a digital way.
So, and to tag in on that, Neil, because I think that's a great example, is think about how much effort it would take me just to get to one of these visits.
Yep.
Right. And then come back. And by the time I get back, I'm so drained. You know, I keep everything, I put it in my folder, but I can't remember what I'm supposed to do with it. And I'm sure that that diabetic patient to some extent had the same issue. You go through this process, you're told to do things, but actually understanding when and how to do that and the process to get those things is incredibly complicated. And so I think there is, and back to my therapy, my vestibular therapy example, there are so many opportunities to create things that people can help drive for reminders that tell them what to do and how to do it and when to do it, that could be so much more effective than what we have right now, because we don't have any of that in a meaningful way as people coming to us. We don't.
Agreed.
This is
Jump-
Alicia.
Alicia,
I would really like to jump in at this point. And first, I want to say, Laura, thank you for sharing your story. I see you. The similarity in our story is that I also got my start in healthcare IT right out of college. I was up on the Hill at OHSU. And I built my career on health information exchange. So when Executive Order 13335, whatever, popped, I actually built some of the first health information exchanges in the country. And I worked so hard. You know, we all did. We worked so hard to drive transformation, right? I worked in translational health at the University of Texas. Outcomes are worse now than they were when I started, right? In terms of, to get from the bench to the curbside. And it's so disheartening. I don't need to go into my whole version of it. And what's wild listening to you, Ken, and like, I also had to step out of the industry because I had a brain injury. I had acquired brain injury, I had brain tumors. I couldn't walk, I couldn't talk, I lost use of my hands. And my business partner was like, why is it taking you weeks to get back to me on this? Well, I didn't know. I didn't know. And I lost everything. I lost everything except for my loving family, right? And so now I'm coming back into the arena with, if I may be so bold, to have navigated the fuckholery that is, being a patient and being unable to cognitively navigate the process while knowing that I know all of this and still can't do it. And that I spent my entire adult life trying to solve the problem. I'm having all the feels, you guys. You're just gonna have to deal with it. It's intense. And so now that I'm back here in entrepreneur land, because healing happens, right? Healing happens. And some of the things, as y'all are talking, Neil and Ken and Laura, about solving these problems, what I've determined and what I'm focusing on is on the coaches. And Bob, you said ombudsman. I've worked with very low health literacy folks, a lot of folks who don't speak English as a native language. And so I think the word coach is very accessible. You tell someone you're going to get them an ombudsman, and I have no idea what you're talking about. So when I think about coaches, I tell people coaches happen anywhere people are helping people, right? So these are our home health navigators, our social workers, chronic disease navigators. And what I started thinking about was the fact that everything we did 10 years ago, 15 years ago, was all way up here. And we were going to solve these problems. I was working with the NHS, the VA, and, the big ministries of health around the world with, HP and IBM, and we got the protocols and the thingies and the softwares. and it didn't really help, right? So if we want to meet the patients, we can't just throw apps at them, but we can create a type of coach that can help them navigate. And what I'm doing, because the coaches are already actually out there, coaching is exploding all over the world in all kinds of different ways. The coaches need tools. A lot of people who get into healthcare IT, they build tools for the managers and for the VEPs and for the clinicians. And I'll just say one more thing and I'll stop for now, is that we can't expect the doctors to solve all of the problems with navigation, right? Doctors are diagnosing diseases and they have 15 minutes to do it. And now we want them to be therapists and counselors and, you know, yes, some of that, but we need to spread that load out. Thank you. Thank you, Laura, and everybody else.
Well, I put my red glass. I saw your red glasses earlier and I wondered. So I put mine on. Thank you. That was really well stated. And I think you can see from the two of us is that the other aspect of this is that we present really normally. So you don't know. There's a big thing in brain injury, like you look fine, you know, what's wrong with you? And I think there's a lot of this, again, kind of hidden cognitive challenge. And again, as Alicia was saying, like, I'm a native English speaker. I've got all these advantages, and other people trying to navigate this stuff that don't understand it, I honestly don't know how they do it. And similarly, we can't put more on the doctors. It isn't their job. I don't know if anybody else has any other thoughts.
I would
agree. Sorry, go ahead, Neil.
I would tell you one other thing, and I know we're talking about specific issues, whether it's brain, diabetes. I tell you that one of the things that amazes me is 10,000 people a day get their Medicare card for the first time. That's how fast we're aging as a population. And I think if you look at this from a population health perspective, there's going to be an unbelievable rush towards how do we engage people, because not just brain injury, but flat out loneliness combined with all these comorbidities is going to be how are we going to help people age in place and deal with that kind of isolation and deal with the fact that these, I mean, let's face it, that's where all the cost of care goes towards overall is towards older populations. You know, and I got my Medicare card, so I get it. And no health plan wants me based on my drug use. But we have to think about it also from these huge perspectives of groups of people and then down to the individual, not just these disease, not just a specific disease tied to them.
I'm curious about how investors look at this, because when I was talking to folks back last fall about doing something in this area, you know, it was the question continuously was like, who is going to buy something like this? Who is going to buy something that provides a better patient experience? And I'm just very curious about what people have been seeing when they've been investing and how investors look at things. And from my perspective, I think it's employers that are funding healthcare that want healthier workers. I think there's tremendous demand and tremendous need and tremendous efficiency, but I'm curious what all of you think.
I'm curious.
This is Ken again. Based upon the feedback that we received on HIMSS, specifically on the use case and really taking AI to the edge and better supporting patients, rural health systems, even DoD and VA, looking for the capability to deploy clinical knowledge, not only to the clinical team that may be, you know, have limited access to systems and even limited expertise, but more importantly, tailoring that for the patient and their family. That was, we got very positive feedback from those entities which maybe you don't have a neurologist to immediately turn to. So how do we deal with that need? And more importantly, how do we help the patient continue to improve or just stabilize, for that matter, by really leveraging either their personal team, their family, or giving them the level of support and ease of communication to where they don't fall through the cracks. So that's just the, I mean, based upon, like I said, the use case that we had, which was a very ill patient who had a partial mastectomy, had brain lesions, high steroids, so very, just a complex case and certainly at risk for sepsis and other infections, and wanted to be at home with her family, unfortunately 150 miles away from the hospital in Honolulu. And so being able to provide that same sort of support in an automated way that doesn't put the weight entirely on the patient, that type of thing certainly was appealing to, like I said, rural health systems. IHS had interest, and even some individual care providers were interested that made it down to our booth. So.
Stephen, you joined us and we're happy to have you. I wonder if you have any comments. You're working in Crimson Health and if you've got some thoughts on this topic. So a couple of the things in the chat came along with whether or not you think this is as a result of not having a universal healthcare. I came from the Canadian system and still same issues. We have family in the UK, similar issues. So what do we do about that? Alicia, you commented that the Australian system may have something. What are they doing that's slightly different than ours?
You know, I don't know, but I watched a almost mother-in-law, long story, go through hospice and end-of-life care down there, and it was beautiful. They just took care of her, and it wasn't like anything I'd seen in the U.S. And she didn't have to worry, and she just didn't have to worry. They just took care of her. So that's just what I saw. But, you know, when I'm in brain injury support groups, and yeah, that single payer system isn't the solution for the navigation component. It just isn't.
Yeah. Stephanie, you commented about to ask Laura a question about support systems and other individuals. Would you like to ask that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And I also, just on your last point, I think that the US has a hard time believing that people are ever going to die. I don't think we do a very good job at that. So my question was around, you talked a little bit about your peer support that you said was so important to you. And so I'd like to know what you've tried. What did you learn? What is still missing for you in that space?
Yeah, so I'll kind of take it back to the beginning. So after the accident in Whistler, it took a couple months to get the subdural hematomas cleared, and I went to a work meeting and still didn't really understand what was wrong with me. And a wife of one of my peers is actually a neuropsychologist, and she said, "Hey, this is what I do." And I was so lucky that she hooked me up with this fabulous team of, you know, people to evaluate, neurologists, speech therapists, you know, all these different components. Through my speech therapist, I did a support group. There were some other support groups available through the Brain Injury Association of Washington, which is a fantastic organization, as is the National Brain Injury Association. I've done some speaking for them. They're really great. And honestly, they're really the avenues to trying to find the right providers that actually understand this. And they can also connect you with other people and events and activities. But again, like the effort to go do a mindful meditation over in Ballard for me was just huge. So it was pretty hard to be able to go do any of that stuff. And interacting over a virtual situation like this has gotten easier for me over the past year, but this is also very hard at times. So really it just became this kind of crazy word of mouth thing where people knew that I'd been through this experience and then would kind of whisper in my ear, because the other thing about brain injury is, like, you don't run around telling people that you broke your head. you know? And even when I retired, I didn't really, I mean, people at my firm knew, but I didn't like make a general announcement to the world. It was just that I had retired because I hoped I could come back and didn't want like to be the broken brain person, right? So there's so many other people that are in the same situation, again, that look normal and are trying to figure out that they just kind of flock to you. And you end up just kind of texting and having different correlations. Like a friend of mine from high school say, hey, the weather's really bad today. Do you have a headache? I'm like, yeah, what's the deal? Like, I don't know. We start researching it. Then we found an app that that actually you can track your headaches, and then it'll show like barometric pressure or humidity or other things. And suddenly you've got correlations with other people, things that you suspect. Or, you know, another friend who's out of state will text and say, hey, what do you do for flare-ups? And like your people are kind of like sending meds back and forth, and, you know, go try this provider, talk to this person. But, you know, when you're in a health system where you have to generate a referral to go talk to a provider, and then it's a 3-month wait to even get in to talk to them and see if they're even a fit, it's extraordinarily challenging. So organizations like Brain Injury Association of Washington are really critical to kind of helping. You can call them anytime and they'll help you navigate, and they'll give you some ideas, and they're super helpful about who really knows how to do this stuff. But support groups are hard. The other piece is that not only getting there, but being attentive with other folks is very challenging. And then also just emotionally, you know, you can see when you're with other people, you can kind of see what's happening. And I know I'm great in verbal right now, and I've been working really, really hard on it for almost a decade. But it's like there's stuff that's kind of stuck in the file drawer, and you can't get the file drawer open to get the word out, even if the word's like spoon. And you can see other people doing that. And it's very jarring, honestly, when you're around other folks and you kind of see that. Sometimes emotionally, it's really, really hard. So I don't do Facebook. I do a little bit of Instagram. There's some great podcasts. There's some really great people that put some great thought stuff out, virtual support. And then, you know, certainly in my community, people I know, I'll work with them directly, and we all chat directly.
Erin, I'm going to ask if you are a venture capitalist and an angel investor, and you've been investing in a variety of things in digital health and throughout a couple of different countries. What compelling things do you see for investing in companies that are trying to go forward? What makes it interesting to you as an investor to want to take on one of these companies that is taking on this initiative? Can I put you on the spot?
No, I appreciate the question, because I get asked that question a lot, and particularly when people ask, why is 98% of my digital health portfolio international and not in the US? You know, first and foremost, I understand business. I'm not a technologist. I understand the business of technology. So when it comes to the innovation, you know, I let the creators and CTOs and all that handle it, because that's an area I don't understand. But I do understand who's going to pay for it. And quite candidly, you know, I always use this analogy, you know, whether you've got Warren Buffett's, you know, bank account, or Bill Gates or Elon Musk, no matter how much money you have, when the doctor says, you know, you should use this app, their question is, who's going to pay for it? You know, is my insurance, is this covered by my insurance? And so, there's a, you know, mentor of mine when I started my career 30 years ago was follow the money. From my experience as an investor, you know, and I'm here in Silicon Valley in the Bay Area, you know, like Seattle, there's no shortage of digital health innovation, but there's a big shortage of who's paying for it. When it comes to the insurance companies, which are, predominantly the payors, there's very few opportunities. That's why I've been investing in foreign markets. It's IP challenges in China, definitely regulatory challenges, but it's more decentralized. And as there, particularly in East and Southeast Asia, is there's been a growing wealth there. You are finding, you know, 1 billion plus people in China. You've got, you know, roughly, I think 700 million in the ASEAN, the 10 Southeast Asian countries, and where you've got more of the individuals who are paying for it. So that's why my portfolio has been there. Yeah, there's no shortage. You know, I've attended events, the meetups, and you know, in Seattle, you know, and in the Bay Area for a long time. No shortage of innovation, but there's a big shortage of who's paying for it. And ultimately, as an investor, you know, and the founders, you know, I'm investor number 3. The founders are investors 1 and 2, have to figure out how they're going to get their investment back. And that is still a work in progress. And pessimistically, I haven't seen much development in the last 10 years in that area. Whereas, you know, in the Middle East, for example, candidly, I'm investing heavily in the Middle East because the governments are paying for it. You know, exercise is non-existent in the Middle East, in the MENA region. Diabetes and renal failure and all that's, you know, and obesity, and they're having a drag on, as we are in the United States, it's having a drag on the public purse, as they say. But there are more, you know, countries paying for these services than the U.S. Insurance companies are, the U.S. government.
Scott, I think
I'm happy to answer any follow-up on that, but that's what I look for.
Yeah, so we've got a couple of company founders on the line here. What do you think you'd need to do to change Aaron's mind in terms of?
Well, I can speak as a founder of a company. I would tell you that he's completely right. I mean, Deep Throat had it, follow the money. And so, like, if you want to be in the world of RPM and you're selling to physicians, then you have to have something that's simple, scalable, and that they get a cut of the reimbursement, and show them how if you don't get their blood pressure 16 times a month, they aren't going to get as much reimbursement. It's as simple as that. And you have to have a mechanism for that. Flip it around. If it's an ACO, then they're trying to manage a capped set of cost. And so you're selling to the ACO on the efficiency of a scalable system. I think Lauren's absolutely right that the employer forgets that they're actually the customer, that health plans are really nothing but middlemen, having worked for 3 of them. They think they're the payer, but they're not. They're the bank. That's all they are. So I think it's, if you follow that out and then look for, then I think the issue becomes one, and I think Aaron will probably agree with this, is you have to come up with one that understands follow the money, and then how can you make it scale? So it's not enough just to even know how to get reimbursed. You have to know how to reimburse times 10x to make it work, and that it still functions well. So can it be a SaaS? Can it be a SaaS integrated to live services? I think if you put those together, then that's the work we're trying to do right now. Is, as people have said to me, I know you've got a great idea, you've got a great product, have you got a great business? Separate. Then they're 3 separate questions.
If I can respond to what, I mean, I agree with Neil 100%. I've been an employee. I'm an employer now of one company I'm a co-founder of, not Digital Health. It's a digital media company. And, you know, we have 460 employees. We're still kind of a startup, 4 years old. But, you know, one of the things, and I'm the chairman of that company, and my, you know, very young CEO, one of the things I recommended, which she adopted, was when we give a letter of employment or offer, not only do we provide the salary, you know, how much they're going to make, but we give them a breakdown of what the cost is to provide healthcare benefits, and a pretty detailed amount. You know, these are the premiums we pay, and it's created an interesting discussion among our employees, our U.S. employees, because, you know, our employees international is a little bit different. About really understanding what is the cost to the employer, what's their out-of-pocket costs, and then what kind of investments can they make, both lifestyle investments to keep costs down, because if we could keep our healthcare costs down, of course, we'd like to increase that into, additional 401k contributions or salaries or, direct financial contributions of some sort. But I'm surprised on how few employees really understand the cost of healthcare to the employees, to the employer, and then looking at, I think the reason I share this, because I think maybe this is foolish idealism, but I think that might be one way to really understand the cost to the system, and then looking at solutions through the things that, many of you on this webinar are creating, and the things I'm investing in on the solutions to keep costs down and to deliver better quality care at a lower cost to the system.
This is Alicia. I have a couple of thoughts on that in terms of incentive. Where's the incentive to pay? And when I was working specifically in indigent health, I don't know if we still call it that, opportunities to get hospitals to pay for services, if we can demonstrate that the tool or the software will actually either improve outcomes or drive down cost. But you got to have really good data for that, right? You got to be able to really say, yeah, I'm going to cut your non-emergent emergency room use by 10%, which can wind up being gajillions of dollars depending on the hospital system. So that's one way, and that's how I was thinking about software and delivering technology for a long time. And one of the things that I'm doing now, and under John talks about find your the submarket of your submarket of your submarket. I don't know how you say it exactly, John. So maybe what I'm looking at right now is not entirely germane to helping solve broader healthcare issues, but what I know is that people are going outside of the conventional medical system. We all know this, right? To get care. And specifically, I'm looking at people who are seeking personal health wellness coaches, right? The average millennial spends $300 a month on personal development. It's a lot of people. And the coaching world is exploding because we are looking for alternatives for care. Right? We're looking for different ways to be taken care of. Places where, I don't want to wait 3 months to go see a neuropsych. I don't want to wait 3 months. And maybe, as Stephanie was talking about, and she's still on the call, how does our peer groups help to support us? What is that? Submarket, yeah. So how our peer groups can support us. And those for me, I actually relied very heavily on things like Facebook groups and social network groups to navigate my injury. And then there's this really simple, easy progression just outside of that, which is this world of coaches. They're not doctors, but they know an awful lot about what your particular issue is. And in some cases, they only charge $25 a session. It's very accessible. And one of the challenges maybe for someone who's an investor is yeah, but you're not getting those $50,000 to $1 million contracts. No, I'm not. So maybe it'll never be that sexy. But that's what I'm talking to my investors about is that layer, the $300 a month from an entire generation that's prioritizing their health and wellness over just about anything else.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Alicia, you said that you are an RN and you're very interested in what's happening in terms of healthcare and innovation. Do you have any comments you'd like to share?
From the standpoint that I have worked in different areas in healthcare. I did case management, and for Laura, even when you have the assistance of case management, it doesn't entail the whole picture. Like she was talking about financials and billing and following all of those issues. I used to also work in a company where we actually did medical review. So we reviewed, as you know, you have now, we started actually I was in a company that started kind of like artificial intelligence with claims. And one of the things that you will see is that medical, the errors in billing are huge. And not even 1% of the billing is actually audited. So even though you have, a machine actually paying the bills, you don't really get to the complexity of not just physicians don't really know what's being billed. So when you're talking about the CPT codes, the ICD-10s, and all of those things, it's interesting to see the amount of money that goes into that. And like Aaron was saying, when I have given advice to some of the startups in healthcare, you always have, first question that you ask is pretty much, who's gonna pay for this? Because there are fantastic ideas out there and fantastic things being done, but nobody's gonna pay for them. And if it's going to add, for example, to the physicians' time, and when we're talking about now going into value-based, if they don't get reimbursed for it, it's probably not going to be something that they're going to go for. It's getting really tight for physicians. And now that value-based is coming into play, it's going to be tougher because they have to have a very strong infrastructure in order to maintain value-based. So very complex situation. And when you have a chronic disease, there are so many balls in the air, it's very hard for the patient to really function. So a lot of opportunity for innovation, but there is also big questions about who's paying for all of this. And that's one of the things that, for example, Amazon is coming up with, that they're going to in the future. I was just listening to something that it's not really a secret, but they're going to be offering healthcare that, usually they do contracts for 3 years. They're going to do 5 years, 5-year contracts. And it's going to be a different structural model for payment for the employers. So it's very, very interesting things coming up. When you think about just the regular insurance, a lot of insurance companies are going to think twice about what they're going to be willing to pay, because the employees usually have the options of changing every year. So they're very cautious about to see what they're going to pay or what they want in their programs. But healthcare is becoming something that you have to really cover, not just the medical issues, but all of the things surrounding it. Like we were talking about transportation, appointments, etc. So very interesting what's coming.
Thanks, Alicia, for sharing that. I agree with you. We really are looking at a multifactorial complex system. Does anyone have any other points that they'd particularly like to bring up?
I would love to hear about, at HIMSS, what was the big tech? What was the new cool fancy flash that was going to save us all?
So I had a great time at HIMSS, not having been there for 9 years. I found it much more accessible. You could really go up and talk to anybody about anything. You didn't feel like there was a massive amount of pressure. Honestly, there was a lot of stuff sort of similar to what Ken described, this whole payvider concept, payer provider concept, and data lakes, and how do we mine information and use it in different ways. And I saw a lot of pieces of that. And then I saw, again, a lot of pieces of components plus services. So not just imaging solutions, but imaging plus the service of the reads, or you know, home care, virtual care with the kit that you bought on Amazon or through Best Buy or whatever that goes to the home, and then the virtual care service that comes along with it. So really different context for provision of care that I think has tremendous value of being able to meet people where they are and where they need it, which I think can be incredibly effective. But I still didn't see enough of that, like, how do we really engage the patient, which again was what I was looking for. You know, one example of that was somebody was showing just conferencing software and the ability to use that as like an elevated telehealth. And it was cool because the provider, essentially, just from a provider perspective, could have like a consistent room and then be able to document in that as they went back and forth, you know, virtual room, as they went back and forth with different patients, and keep that context for each patient as part of the chart. And I thought that's awesome. Like, why don't patients have that? Like, why don't I have that on my side of the visit? And so we talked about that for a while, because like if you think about, again, the same issues, if you're a person accessing virtual care, you still need to document what's been said. And if I had a context of my provider visit and here's all my information, I think that would be incredibly powerful. So I think it's still a combo. You know, HIMSS is always really fun. The hype wasn't there, which honestly, I'm happy not having like all the crazy stuff. There's nothing in Vegas as it is. But, you know, among all the moonshots and all the AI and all the genomics and all the really cool things, I think we are moving the market forward in interesting ways. And my concern, again, continues to be just that we're creating new silos as we do this. And, you know, back to your experience specifically, how do we make sure that we tie all that together in a way that actually enables the innovation to be used most effectively? I think that'd be my challenge to everybody. Like, what can we do that's simple, that enables the innovation to be used effectively?
If I can add a comment to that, because I totally agree. I have a motto I live by, and I pass it to you all. And the motto is this: it ain't dog food if the dog don't eat it. We spend a lot of time making all kinds of cool dog food, and we think it's a success because we made it, and it doesn't matter if it isn't eaten. And and nobody spends time. Hundreds of thousands of health apps, almost no one uses any of them. We should be focusing on the engagement. Actually is the problem, not all the pieces.
And this is Ken, from at least my experience at HIMSS, the one thing that came up repeatedly, both during our learning health system panel as well as just side conversations, is why is healthcare being treated differently than any other service? You have this level of expectation of quality, of the ability to actually provide feedback into everything else around you, whether it be your cable bill, whether it be whatever. And yet healthcare has somehow escaped that over the decades, over the centuries, if you will. And it's becoming more of a focus. And I mean, a lot of these touch points that I've heard today really kind of, they lean into that direction. To be able to deliver contextual care means I have to bridge across all of these different engagements. An engagement doesn't exist by itself, and we treated it that way. And even to the apps tend to be one purpose. They don't tend to be designed to integrate. They're by their very design supposed to be monolithic, and you give that company money. Building something which is standards-based, as we're focused on, engaging with standards organizations, really helping drive communication and collaboration, not just exchange of data, actual collaboration in healthcare. Those were some of the movements, certainly, that I saw this year at HIMSS, and hopefully we'll see more of it.
Did they say anything about release of information? Were there any discussions about release of information from patients?
Yes. Absolutely.
Because one of
Specifically
the
with the data blocking rule go into place, that was a big conversation.
Yeah, because one of the things that goes about, regarding the release of information is that I don't know if any of you have ever gone to any of the clinics, hospitals. When you sign a release for information, it's now electronic. You never see what you sign. And if you actually request, what you're signing, you would be very surprised. In, like, for example, Swedish hospital. If you go to Swedish and you sign your release, when you actually, because I went with a friend and I said, you're gonna sign this. And I asked her, you might wanna request this, what you're signing. And so the lady actually printed it and it said, we own your data. We can send it to whomever we want. We can enter it for research. We can, you're allowing us to put a residence straight in you. If you're gonna have a procedure for surgery, same thing. we can have residents do your surgery. I mean, it was unreal, 2 pages. So that's one of the things that I was, asking you if in HIMSS they're talking anything about this, about that I think that it should be something that the patient has more control over, and that they actually say, I'm giving permission for this. I don't want a resident to do my surgery. Click. You have to give patients control over what they're signing over. I mean, it's unreal what people are signing, and people don't really know what they're signing.
I'd like to dovetail on that because this is something that I'm specifically addressing with my product, and not right this moment, but it's in our roadmap, is the ability for us to create our data lakes that are consumer governed. I should always have control of my data. If I created that data, it's mine. And what we intend to do is use blockchain to ensure we always have provenance. You always own or at least we know that it's your data. And when we have sufficient data that we can start doing things like research, then everyone should be remunerated for that. If you use my data in research, I get some dosh, right? I think that's where we need to get to. And one of the things, I put this in the chat, is that there's a lot of this weirdness in our healthcare system. It's just it's an artifact of this idea that we have to protect the patients from the complexity of diagnosis. That, they're not going to possibly understand, with notes. The reason we don't get a copy of the notes right after the session is so that we don't get to see really what the doctor thinks of us, or what the doctor, not to say that the doctors, where's Bob? He's already left. Not that the doctors are insidious, but the doctors want to feel free to say whatever they want to say. They'll say labile instead of, crazy, but they need a chance to scrub that and make it all professional. Sorry, I just had my brain injury moment. I forgot what I was talking about. Users should own their data. Absolutely. I look forward to when that happens. And I hope anyone who's building software that involves patient data, that you have mechanisms in place to ensure that that patients can take their data with them wherever they go.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of issues with the complexity of healthcare being used almost against patients, because in my FDA example, or in the HIPAA example, this whole joke about because HIPAA, right? Like, we want to use HIPAA as some kind of blanket thing for a whole bunch of stuff that it doesn't really apply to, that gives us different protections. I think we need to, anything that would give people the power over their own information is something I think is important. But the other aspect of it that struck me was that I saw someone shared, there's a Pew Charitable Trust study a while back that said that 94% or so of patients were asked what components of their chart that they wanted to have access to, and they said yes, 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 yes. But then when I think about it, to your point, the stuff that's in my chart is not really meaningful to me. I understand and respect the whole open notes discussion. I get frustrated with the fact that I have charts coming from multiple health systems, even if they're on the same vendor. I can't cross-correlate that data or say that, you know what, I just had that study done someplace else the other day. I can't clean it up. I can't, you know, do anything with it. But that's, again, knowing what you said about me isn't as much as like knowing what I need to do in the future, right? What does that mean? What are my options? What are my interventions? Where can I go? What's this going to cost? And it's almost like exposing, you know, we're finally at the point where patients have the ability to get the stuff that's in our crazy records, and that's fine, but that's really not what's going to actually help them in the long run.
I'm curious. I mean, I completely agree on the transportability of data. You know, I've used, and I've had family members use Epic. You know, for my father, my late father was with Kaiser since the late 80s, and when Kaiser started using Epic, and always found it challenging, just the transportability of it. And you know, the financial industry has the same problem. That's why it's so difficult for people to transfer banks. But to my question is, I attended Mobile World Congress in Barcelona at the beginning of July, and where healthcare has taken a very prominent role at that event, or Mobile World Congress Shanghai. But cybersecurity is really becoming a major, it always has been a big issue, but or lack thereof of cybersecurity when it comes to healthcare technology. That was a big discussion we had on the sidelines in Barcelona about that. And you know, you now have healthcare data, which is the most valuable on the black market when it comes to all data. I'm kind of curious at HIMSS this year. It's been about 4 years since I've attended the last event, but even 4 years ago, cybersecurity was very much of a you know, not even an afterthought, a no thought. Is there more of a discussion about cybersecurity in keeping, you know, data secured and the appropriate mechanisms to make that happen at this year's event?
There is a ton of cybersecurity. That's not my area of expertise. I spent a little bit of time with some folks just to get some general sense of how they're looking at things. But yeah, I saw a ton of booths around cybersecurity.
It's encouraging to hear.
Yeah, I think one of the other issues is that once the patients get their information and put it in an app, and just there are over probably 500,000 apps in healthcare, probably more than that. And once people download them or have them in an app, they're not protected by HIPAA. And if they start sharing it or do whatever they want with that data, once it's in an app or a website or whatever, is no longer protected. So that's also one of the things that is interesting about, you know, healthcare and patients' data.
Well, I think if I could, I mean, that's a core function that we've certainly incorporated into our platform, and that other people are doing the same thing, is back to that concept of sovereign identity and sovereign health data, being able to combine across, whether it's Epic or wherever we're pulling it from, do a conversion with FHIR, have it standardized, but put that control back in the patient's hands. It's actually, I would argue, more secure than anything HIPAA can provide, because HIPAA has tons of loopholes you can drive trucks side by side through. And so from that perspective, I think there are solutions out there that are taking this into account, both at the enterprise level from a cyber perspective, but also, because we're not the only ones doing it, looking at it from the patient perspective and recognizing that this is your data and you should own it. You should be able to control it. You should have visibility into where it goes.
I think, Ken, you know, you've probably experienced the similar things and been dealing with similar things, but I have so many experiences where I walked into a clinic or wherever and been handed some kind of a form to fill out on paper and been asked, like, you know, what I've had in the past that's been relevant to this. And, you know, in my case, I keep everything on Dropbox. I've had 6 MRIs. And so, getting to 6, I remember like going in there and finding all the relevant dates, even though I know what system these folks are on, where all the imaging was done, and how HIEs work, and it's all in there. I hand wrote all that stuff down. And then when the exam came, exam number 6, it said no relevant priors. And so what strikes me, again, back to this, like, there's this constant request for data, there's this constant request for information. They have all this information in these health systems, but they don't use it effectively. And it's super frustrating as a person to realize that you're being put through a process to revalidate stuff that that they already have without the ability to actually just go in and fix it, right? So I'm hoping that we can have better control. It'd be great if I could just say, yeah, here it is, and please use it when you do my diagnosis. That would be awesome.
And I would tell you that along with that transferability, I'll give you an example. I got a bone scan yesterday, and I got my data back today. And and I'm in Epic, I'm in the Kaiser system. And besides the fact that I get to have the honor of I'm on all sorts of drugs, and I get a colonoscopy every 6 months, lucky me. The bone scan was completely transparent and completely undecipherable to me as what the hell it said. I mean, literally, it was like it could have been Martian for what they told me. And ultimately, it's that I don't have osteoporosis, I have osteopenia. But there's no way I would understand that. And I have a master's degree in public health and been in the business for 45 years. So probably the greatest security of all is perhaps making it so unintelligible that it's almost unusable by anybody.
Well, and to my earlier comment, our focus has been from day one, and it's from our work with DoD and VA. We've been working with them for 10 years on interoperability solutions. And so even within DoD, they have a multitude of systems, each of which sort of speaks its own language, and tons of point solutions for interoperability. And so we've sort of had that in mind when we engineered our platform, mainly from the perspective of taking that data and making it make sense, applying clinical NLP to identify the actual clinical concepts and be able to search it so you can provide that test data for what you're about to do versus, I don't remember exactly what happened last time. So being able to provide that, but more importantly, I think to your point, really targeting, how do I translate this for the patient? Because you're right, the majority of lab reports, things like that, aside from maybe words that say positive or negative, being able to show what those things really mean in the context of you, not some make-believe person, but you and your health. That is kind of, we're not there yet.
Not to mention the fact that negative is good and positive is bad.
Yeah.
I think
because without that data, how do you support your own care? So.
But the other issue on this is the fact that there are mergers and acquisitions all the time. So you have, you have a clinic or a hospital or whatever that they merge, and then they adopt a new system. So everything gets rebooted, and not everything translates into that new system. And again, the data changes, as well as once I remember that company here in Washington that was working on DNA and genetics and all of this, Aravel, and they were actually bought. That data is no longer all of those people that had their DNA and their gene studies and all of that. It went to someone else. So it's interesting to see what happens when things are, when companies are being bought or hospitals. It changes the game.
Well, and I think what you'll find, at least certainly what I was still hearing at this time, certainly more recognition that standardization was becoming a requirement-ish. It depends on where they're being pushed though. It's the market that drives these things. And I know, again, engagement with DoD and VA, the main reason Cerner has been making their data more amenable, more standardized, is because DoD and VA are forcing them to. And that's the 800-pound gorilla, at least in the US. And I mean, VA is the largest, certainly the largest care system in the US, and combined, they are the largest care system in the entire world. Those things are what drives them. So the standards exist. It's more the matter of, well, why should I do it? I mean, it gets back to where's the money, where's the money going? Where's it coming from? If you're not going to pay me to do it, why would I do it?
Yeah, I think that's why Cerner got the contract instead of Epic, was because of that.
And we had a talk a couple of weeks ago by Chris Saxman, and you can actually find it on the Seattle Angel Conference YouTube channel, was talking about the payment system and incentives. I'm going to, our conversation's been super interesting. I am going to draw us a little bit to a close in the nature of time. Laura, I called you and said, could you come and talk and share your story? Firstly, it's very personal. It's super important for us to hear. It's resonated with many people. But the important thing about this is you've also given us a challenge in terms of going forward with some ideas on how we can do better. And people are working on that, all of us, in different ways. So if you want to, please stay with us, come back to join us for some other conversations. We'd love to have you. I know that within the period of time in the day, you've got multiple things, including we're both in the same boat of getting two kids off to college. But thank you again for your time, and everyone. I really appreciate your participation. John said, if you want to keep the chat, just do a click on the save button, and you can follow us up on the YouTube channel afterwards.